Okay, super. I think we're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to AMA number 52, 20th of December, and it's the Holochain beta release candidate AMA. And hello, Mary, Art, and Eric.
Howdy. Hello.
All right, before we jump into the questions, so obviously very excited about the beta release candidate announcement. I thought I'm going to give a very quick summary. There's some new ways we've been describing Holochain that I think are particularly powerful. And I think like just to introduce the AMA, we talk about Holochain is capable of providing fast, zero-cost data storage, processing, and messaging that auto-scales with the size of the user base without using a centralized server. That means it can deliver on the promises of user empowerment that makes Web3, including high throughput, zero cost, nearly infinite scalability, low resource consumption, privacy, failure tolerance, and ease of use. So these are some of the reasons I think everybody is so excited. That quote was from the Holochain blog, the full feature Holochain beta release candidate announcement. We had about 125 questions for this AMA, which we really appreciate for everyone. Obviously can't answer them all, but we should be able to get through 25 or 30. Before we get into the Holochain beta stuff, we noticed there were a lot of questions about Holo and how Holo and Holochain work together. And so we wanted to disambiguate a couple of those questions before we then get on to talking about Holochain. So Art, I think this is one of your specialties. So first one, the Holochain beta is the foundation for Holo and Holofuel. Do you think that Holo and Holofuel development will go faster after the beta launch because of the more stable Holochain?
I mean, the basic answer is absolutely. In the same way that the frequent changes to Holochain, the updates, enhancements, and fixes were disruptive to external developers, they were also disruptive to our internal development. The Holo team had to keep making updates and be dealing with changes and be fixing their apps to run on the new things. And so for sure, it's going to speed things up. Plus, just having hit the stability point and having a well-performing version of Holochain for the hosting infrastructure just makes all of Holo's work, the development and testing, go more smoothly.
And to clarify some of that, Holo in the last initiative, when we are working on billing and payments for the Holo infrastructure, I think we updated the Holochain version 3 or 4 times just during that one initiative, because we were waiting for things that were coming or testing new fixes that were going. So definitely, if we can get out of the churn of having to run updates across all of the infrastructure, it's going to make a huge difference.
Okay, for all of you on the social channels that are then going to take that information and calculate how far from Holo beta we are and argue about it. I think I spent 3 or 4 hours on the weekend involved in and tracking various arguments about development pace. Do with that information what you will. Okay, another one. If Holochain launches, okay, harmless. If Holochain launches without Holofuel, how do you apply payment on Holo host? Won't HAPS start running on Holochain?
Yes, apps will be running on Holochain, and it's quite intentional that it's set up that way. There's no internal token or currency in Holochain on purpose, right? So you can definitely run HAPS without Holofuel. That's on purpose. And this is a good thing, not a bad thing. Remember, Holo, the hosting infrastructure from Holo, is really for bridging Holochain apps to mainstream web users, so they can have an experience that's just very much like Web 2 centralized hosting, and yet still actually be using decentralized apps that are, in this case, being served to them on a peer network. And so we see that as a critical success strategy for going mainstream, for being able to have Holochain apps reach mainstream folks. So the other thing that makes this a good thing is that it reduces the amount of hosting that publishers have to pay for their apps when you have some portion of your user base hosting themselves. And right now, actually, the cost of running dApps on blockchains and stuff like that is one of the big inhibitors. I mean, it can be up to 400 million times more expensive than centralized cloud hosting. And we're trying to actually drive that price down so we can be competitive with cloud hosting. And this is one of the ways, is to be able to actually have a portion of the network be self-hosted.
Well, and even cost aside, Holochain has to be in full feature release, stable release before Holo can be completed and before Holofuel can even work. But I think what you were pointing to is also can be said another way, which is like adoption is going to happen first with people around Holochain who are looking for distributed applications, but mainstream adoption, where you get to use those apps with people who might not be ready, who might not be listening for and waiting for, the distributed app revolution, basically. Those folks, they're looking for something really similar. So Holo hosting is about the mainstream of adoption. And really, it takes the developers being on board to build the distributed apps, and then the early adoption users being ready to use those on Holochain before any of this actually has the kind of snowball effect into needing Holo. So it's perfect that it's coming now. It's perfect that there's runway for these apps to get built right now while we're finishing up Holo.
Thanks, Mary. And can you give us an indication on the expected release date of both Holochain beta and then also Holochain mainnet?
Well, the Holochain 0.1.0 beta, that's coming out in January. January 26th is the date that we've targeted for that. Arthur, I don't know if you want to talk about this. There's no real mainnet for Holochain. I mean, it's every application is its own network. So every time somebody takes an application and builds it and releases it in a form for end users, that's its own mainnet for each application, essentially, right? But people kind of relate to the Holo hosting network as a mainnet for Holochain. And it is a mainnet for Holo, not a mainnet for Holochain. It's just that it means that that's when it can become mainstream for apps to be able to use by everybody, not just the folks who are getting into it right now with us, that want to install a peer-to-peer application at this stage. So this is that adoption strategy we've been talking about for the last couple of years. And we think this is just critical for taking Web3 mainstream.
Super. Okay, thanks. So we've disambiguated a little bit around the difference between Holo and Holochain. And you can see in some of these questions, for those of you who've been watching over a long period of time, there's a series of common misconceptions. Holofuel being related to Holochain, not Holo, is especially a big one. And this idea that Holochain has a mainnet, which Mary described a little bit. So for those of you who are new to this, hopefully that is helpful. Now on to the really exciting part. So there's a lot of questions around Holochain and Holochain development. And the Holochain beta release candidate is a developer-focused product, I guess you can call it. And so Eric, especially coming from that side of the more engineering side of the world, I'd love to know how the team feels about the milestone. And yeah, it's been quite a journey. This question comes from Fritz and would like to hear how you're all feeling and what your experience of this milestone has been.
Well, thank you, Fritz, for that question about emotions and feeling, because it's been really fantastic to have this experience, this feeling of crossing a threshold and watching how we were able, I mean, there's two parts of it. One is the technical stuff that's happened and how it feels good to really have landed that and watch the performance capability, watch it all flow together. And the other is the team capacity and being able to declare a date and hit that date. So, we have a policy of not doing dates that we can't hit. And so because it's not nice, it's not good to people. So of course we can't promise that every single date we're going to hit every one, but we will only promise a date when we really think we can do it. And so that experience is a double celebration. So there's the technical side, and then there's the process human side of hitting that. It feels awesome. Thanks for the question. You're muted.
Sorry, my muted. I just unmuted. Why should there even be a beta release candidate at all? Why not just go straight to beta?
So release candidates are a very standard practice, especially in the open source world, where and especially also if what you're building is infrastructure software, where you really need a large number of people testing things. And so a release candidate says, we think this is pretty much good to go, but we need to have the community test it out. And then afterwards, once we have that, because we know it's really hard to get all the little nooks and crannies of anything exactly right. And so indeed, we already had feedback. And so we already had release candidate number 1 that went out that fixed tiny little bugs. And so that's going to keep happening until January 26th, when we'll get for the full beta release.
Just to be clear, number 1 was number 2 because the first release candidate was 0.
Yeah, that's right.
So the cat's excited as well, Eric. The latest this has come to check in on progress of the AMA. All right, and someone who I'm not sure who asked this question, but someone Art who's obviously been chatting to you or following you said, from what I've heard from Arthur, it will not be realistic to run a full Holochain node on mobile. Is that not a disappointment after having claimed otherwise for years?
Well, I think there's some things that need to be clarified about this. So one important context is that what we did in ICO for was web hosting infrastructure on Holo. And that's the thing we have to focus on first, rather than like a mobile first strategy or something like that. And already you can run web hosted apps on mobile. So it's not that you can't access these things from a mobile phone. You actually already can our alpha testing that on Holochain, our Holo hosting and that kind of thing. So that's our first strategy for reaching mobile. Then right now, also Tori just did an update. HoloREA just did an update, which is the platform that our launcher is built in that allows you to build for mobile. So it's very likely that we could even compile and run Holochain on mobile right now. So the problem isn't, is it possible to run? The problem is because phones provide enough compute power and everything, but the problem is that phones and their data plans are more organized toward being a client, not being a peer. And so if you think about it, first of all, there's the issue of battery life, that in order to preserve battery life, Android and Apple, they kill what they think of as, troublesome apps that are using more power than they think that they should. And if Holochain is trying to gossip with other peers and that kind of stuff, for sure, it's going to get put to sleep to preserve battery life, because that's how these products have extended battery life, is by putting to sleep apps that are busy, right? And so the problem is, if you put to sleep a Holochain peer, you're now out of date. You're no longer gossiping and that kind of thing. So then we have to send wake up messages through their messaging portals to kind of wake it up again and do new gossip and that kind of stuff. And how often do we want to do that? And how much energy do we want to spend on doing that for running a whole peer? When you consider the bandwidth issues, most people probably don't want to be risking paying for bandwidth on their data plans or using up bandwidth of their data plans, because even the quote unlimited plans are typically have limits for high speed, and then they spill over into low speed as an unlimited thing. And most people don't want to use up all their high speed access gossiping data on Holochain. So we actually have a problem with the way the mobile industry is currently structured. That is the barrier. It's not a Holochain barrier. As we move toward other solutions, like we have regular mesh networks for mobile support and that kind of thing, that this might become feasible. But our short-term solution is really to split Holochain, to have a light client that runs locally on the phone and can make changes locally and all that kind of stuff, and then have a backend that's doing gossiping that you interface with, and then you can synchronize just those two things whenever you want on the light client side. And so we do have that planned as an interim solution, and that because that seems to fit the way the industry works and what most users' expectations are. But it's not because you can't run Holochain on a phone. It's just most people won't want to.
Thanks. Great question, great answer. All right, so Eric, tell us a little bit more about the improvements to Gossip performance. Does it look like the current set of changes will make Gossip performance good enough for most applications, or do you have additional improvements in the pipeline that you plan to implement before prioritizing other Holochain features?
So this is a great question, and it's a technical question. What I want to do is I want to describe the problem a little bit in the similar way that Arthur just did about the Android side, so you can just have the context of why it's an issue and what we've done to solve some of this stuff. So the problem is that you've got these completely independent nodes who want to talk to each other and share information with each other and synchronize and come up to date. Now, when you want to make that happen fast, you have to be ready for, you have to handle a couple things. One, you've got asymmetric upload and download speeds from different peers. So that means somebody can push something out their pipe because they've got a symmetric 1 gigabyte fiber, and they can push 1 gigabyte straight up the pipe. But on the other side, the download, it's very slow, and vice versa. And so you have to manage the expectations from the two nodes that are gossiping with each other about when to time out, how much data to put in that pipe. Is it blocking other things on the network? Because Holochain has to behave and play well with other applications that might be running on your computer and not make it so that you can't watch your Netflix movie at the same time. And so then what you have to handle is like, one side is receiving a ton of data and says, no, that's too much for me. And the other side has to like back off and be okay with that. So there's a bunch of really technical, detailed problems that are hard to solve in and so on top of that, it's like you may be getting duplicate data of the same data from the same people at the same time, which kind of clogs up your bandwidth at the same time with the same data. So we want to be able to send messages and say, you send me this part, you send me that part, and don't duplicate that. So there's a bunch of complexity in here that we've been working on and we've been getting to work right. Now, what I can say, with the other part of this question was about, is it going to be good enough, and tell us about the improvements. What I can say is yes, we are just running some beautiful tests and it's good enough for now. It's not going to be a blocker. However, I think personally that this whole field of gossip and peer-to-peer networks is going to be a huge area of research for optimization and making this stuff really land well. It's an opportunity for deep mathematical approaches to how to do this, for high-level work on this, and I'm actually really excited about our capacity to chunk off that part of the system and have different gossip strategies be able to be added in as they get found by the industry as a whole, by our team. We're going to, at some point, we're not doing this right now, I think we will be creating a whole group inside the Holochain development team that's focused just on how to maximize and make gossip work really well in all of these weird situations that exist in the world and all the different network topologies. So yeah, I think the current set of changes is good enough for beta, where we are right now, especially beta 1. Beta 2 is network stability. We have a good period of time to increase our performance there. Like some of the tests that we were running was like, we have a test, stress test application in which we upload images, and we were uploading 1 gigabyte worth of images and watching them come down the pipe, and it was good enough. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't as if you were downloading everything at a very high speed, but you don't want it to. You want it to be a little bit slower so as not to interrupt the other stuff. So I think it's pretty good. I'm excited about it.
Okay.
One thing I just want to note is that part of why this is, I think, more challenging for Holochain than many blockchains that have like block producers or supernodes or things like that is that all of those tend to run in data centers on backbone connections and that kind of stuff, not on personal networks at home and that kind of thing. And we really have to make sure Holochain works across all of these network topologies, and that makes things a little bit more touchy.
Going into the developer ecosystem, Mary, so what are our current plans beside future immersives to get developers interested in the tech? And are there plans of an online training portal to reach more devs or other strategies from?
Well, the Holochain isn't just having a beta release, but we're also, we're launching this in a way, right? Where this is a developer first technology. That means we have to really get it out in front of devs, have them test it. Obviously, we've got a really great developer ecosystem that's been working with us all these years. as it's been in alpha, and that's fantastic. It's a wonderful starting point. But as we've shared before, we're really going to be investing in developer outreach and training and engagement and more. And we actually have in real life types of trainings planned. We also have some online immersive trainings planned. I know they were asking, what are we doing besides immersive? But I think it's important to talk about this because the way that we're planning on doing the online immersive training, it's going to be sort of setting us up to also create self-paced work for people to be able to do them after the fact. So we're really excited about that. We're going to be doing things in multiple continents this year. We're going to be doing hackathons. And, the community of developers, they've been working on a whole bunch of projects that support the adoption and growth of the ecosystem. Some of these are backed by the Holochain Foundation. Others of these are emerging. Some of these are actually just the tooling bits and pieces and the expansion of making it better for developers to develop. And I think that's a real critical part of what the stage that we're in terms of our ecosystem, which is how do you get developers up and running faster? We don't even know all the things that all those developers in our own ecosystem are going to build to help each other. And I think that's a really cool part of kind of the stage and the excitement in the how people will learn. So first thing first is follow us on the developer portal, developer.holochain.org. You may have already noticed there's been some changes to that, trying to make it easier for people to get started. And we're going to keep adding more and more at that location. So that's where you're going to be wanting to watch.
If I can just add one little thing in there, for people who've been around in the world, who might remember in Web 2 when Rails came out with its scaffolding, some of you will know how much of a game changer that was for Web 2 apps, the way you could scaffold up an app that would run literally in 10 minutes. And what we've got coming out, our scaffolding will be, I believe, just as powerful for Web 3 apps. And that's almost out, like maybe today, maybe tomorrow, we'll see.
Web 3 on Rails.
Really, I mean, that's a super powerful ability for developers just to get started.
Okay, and talking about other things available and that bring masses. So Launcher has been something that internally has made a very big difference to testing applications. So when is that going to be available for everybody and in full working order? Someone here has been trying to download apps but unable to run them on Launcher.
Yeah, well, the answer is very soon. And so, first of all, I'm grateful for your patience and you're coming to this question nicely. And also, it's been a real bummer. Like, we really hit a problem, and this was back to the gossip stuff, where there was some issues with the gossip, where the size of the data that was inside the Dev Hub meant that the gossip was timing out before it could deliver it, and then it would just keep retrying. And so that bug that you're seeing, the fact that you can't click anything and says try again, is because the gossip wasn't working. And so I'm really sorry that happened. It's kind of embarrassing, to be honest. I wish we would have been able to get that one right earlier on, but we didn't. And so now we are, and that's coming out. But this is a really important context to talk about another piece here, which is the Holochain beta is one thing, which has landed, right? The beta release candidate has landed, and it's also part of why release candidates. But then there's this whole chain of toolings that are dependent on that to be able to release. And so just to name a few of them and speak a little bit about them. Holochain by itself, it is great. You can use it in a bunch of different contexts, but you pretty much also want to be able to connect to it with a JavaScript client that lets you connect up to the Holochain running conductor and be able to have that interact with your apps. So that piece of software has to be updated. There is also a client that connects to the Holochain conductor that's written in Rust for people who are not connecting up to web apps, but are connecting up into built binaries like in Tauri or in, for example, Electron applications. Or we also have somebody who's using, I think, a VR headset, right? And that stuff is compiled in C++, and so you want, and connects up to the Rust client, not the JavaScript client. So that has to be updated. Then there's the scaffolding that we were just talking about, our Web3 on Rails, that whole tooling. Well, that also requires a new tool that we have in place, which is the Launcher CLI, a command line interface to the launcher, so that you can spin up and run tests. And So there's all of these little other components that need to be released in time. And this particular release, this particular beta release candidate had a lot of things that landed. So it's taking us a little bit longer to manage all of them quickly than it normally does. Once we run through this iteration, I think we'll be able to have faster releases of the whole tool chain. It's taken us more than a week, I think, to get to a place where all of these pieces are working, but they're almost there, really almost there.
It's a lot, isn't it? Very exciting. Okay.
Well, and I think there's even more. I mean, like what Eric hasn't even brought up is the Dev Hub and the App Store and all the other pieces that are still in the works or partially done or ready for it. Can you say a little bit more about the developer experience, like how it is, like what things that they're waiting for, what things that they see as they're using it? I mean, you talked about just the ones that we're updating this week, but there's more beyond that.
Well, so one of the, I mean, I do a lot of Holochain app development myself. And so there's stuff in the community, like many of you will know about Holochain Open Dev, which is a community of developers who've built some stuff around the profiles. So for the profiles to be used, which is a tool that a lot of apps currently use to be able to have avatars and nicknames and stuff attached to your agent ID, there's a whole set of JavaScript node modules that have been produced that themselves need to be updated, and they require updating using the JavaScript client. So that's another level removed. And so that stuff we're also, I've been working on that myself as a contributor in that space, if that's what you mean, Mary, as part of the extra context of what needs to happen at the same time.
Yeah. And like you said, I think what's really important to get is that we just went through a shift change going from alpha to this beta RC. And you could, a lot of people probably just go, well, it's just another release, but it's not. From an internal perspective and from sort of like a tooling perspective, you got to get that we've been developing and doing a release structure that was the same for the last year or so, maybe a little bit longer than that for Holochain. And in this last week, we just created a new kind of whole branch of releasing that is required, and that has a whole new flow and a whole new process and a new form of operations, essentially. And the thing is we continue to have the development branch continue. So now we have to do both of them at the same time. So for us, this RC is really important because it's a learning process for us to get this in place so that we can get the operations side of it smoothed out. And now we have a couple of weeks of being able to do that as we complete, December and into January before the beta release of Holochain. So I think it's Holochain, it's all the tooling, and it's all the infrastructure and process that goes with it that's so important. So
yeah, just to chime in on that too, not only the beta branch release management, but also the updates to the developer sites and documentation and website that went into this because there were significant changes happening. This was a huge release organizationally. We had people across the whole organization involved.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So it's good to do that before final beta so that all of the things are in place and we can work out any of the kinks.
Yeah, and one more tiny comment on that, just to give you a little bit more context of the difference in this phase change, is that since one of the things we're promising with a beta candidate is a form of stability, it meant that a lot of little things that would mean lack of stability, we put them into this release. So that means there were a lot of changes, which means that it was also more likely to be difficult to integrate those changes. And we hit a few snags with that. We put in some changes that some people were depending on not having been there. And so we had to rush to make that work. And that's part of why that happened with the Dev Hub, right? And so that's part of why that's taking a little bit longer to complete after that release, because of the number of changes that went into this, because we're promising stability, and yet another reason why the release candidate was an important decision to do. I feel really happy that we made that decision. I think it's been a great thing.
Again, for those of you who've watched plenty of AMAs, it must be nice to see a lot of these conversations coming to fruition. I'm certainly taken back, as some of you, as Eric especially, as you're talking, taken back to 2019 and 2020 years. I mean, we're talking about a lot of these things that they would be coming. It's phenomenal to actually see them here. There's a question about performance, Eric. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how severe do you think reliability issues or performance barriers based on the dev community automated testing of the beta release candidate could be? And do you think it could significantly delay a January release if the scale is high?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because all this stuff is on a risk gradient, right? None of it is 100%. We don't know for sure. I would rate the risk low, 1 to 2, if 1 is low and 10 is high risk. And the reason why is because of just the things that I've been seeing as we've been doing our testing with our internal launcher that we have, and we watched what happens. It's good enough, like I said before. And so I don't think it's going to delay our January release for that reason. I don't know, we could find some weird thing that happens, but we have enough time. Like we put a little bit of that in and say, okay, if there's something really goes weird, we can make it work. So and also to remember that this one is our stability for the HDK release, and then our 2.0 release is the one that's network stable. So that one is going to be that's where we're going to be spending a lot more time increasing the stability, increasing the performance to that beta, because that stuff won't change the HDK and people's ability to run HAPs. The only thing they have to do is update their conductor. So just a little bit of context around that too. Did you have something?
Well, just one little added thing on this to help with our diagnostics of gossip and all that kind of stuff. There's actually now a progress bar in the launcher, and the progress bar, we probably have some refinements to do on the UI. Sometimes it's a little glitchy, like it pauses and then continues and that kind of stuff, but that's also reflecting some of what's happening underneath it, like a connection gets lost to whoever you were gossiping with, and then you're waiting to resume and stuff like that.
Or the person you were gossiping with says too much data, hold off, and you're like, okay, hold off. So I back off and wait for a little bit. So the progress bar looks like it stops, which is exactly what you want to see, because then we have direct user feedback about what's happening underneath the hood.
But it wasn't visible before. You didn't know if you were still waiting to get yourself caught up. If you just joined a new app, you don't know if you've caught up to date yet, if you're like ready to go. And that was part of what provided a not so great user experience.
Yeah.
Can you guys describe that? But before you jump away from that one, sorry, David, I think what you just said made perfect sense to developers who, or even maybe some users of apps that have been using the launcher already. But maybe you could describe what happens when an end user goes in and tries to use the launcher to create an app or to launch an app. What are they doing and what's happening?
Okay, well, you go and you click on install app, and what that does is it connects into the Dev Hub, which is itself right now it connects into the Dev Hub. Soon it will connect into the App Store, which is where developers have uploaded their HAP. So they have literally taken their DNAs, which is actual code, and they've uploaded it to a distributed shared space for holding that data. And so the launcher connects to that app and goes and says, this is what's been marked as ready for being made available. And it tries and goes and gets that data. I mean, we can get a little bit more complicated, because usually what ends up happening is that data gets synchronized as soon as you first run the launcher. And so it's going to see if it has gotten that data locally. And if it can't get synchronized, that was where we were having some of the problems. But as soon as it is synchronized and all of the data for that app has come in locally, then it can take that and install it into the local conductor, take it off of the cached DHT data, and install it into the local conductor. Is this what you're going for?
Maybe let me say that a little more simply. The experience is a little bit like having an app store like you have for your phones.
Yeah.
Right. So you click install an app and it brings up a list of apps. You choose one, and then you start to see the progress there, or you can also be seeing the progress in advance of the Dev Hub syncing. By the time we have the beta release, we're intending to hide the Dev Hub from people and only have developers actually activate that and have a little bit more user-friendly interface on the App Store side only. And but that's still in flux at the moment as we're making those enhancements to the launcher.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, super. Okay, there's the final one is like, do you think the pace of completing remaining milestones will be increased as a result of the beta release candidate? I'm just going to say like yes. And
yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, but in a long way. And I've already even watched this. Like what I was saying is I'm developing some of these apps, and I can just see how quickly it's going to be, how much more easy it is going to be to keep those apps updated and running on them. Yeah, it's kind of like what Mary answered before. And
on the more businessy side, Firstly, like there's someone who's really interested in HoloREA and investing in HoloREA. Eric, can you help with that?
Yeah, so people are really, I mean, there's been some publicity around the REA project, which REA stands for Resource Event Agent Accounting. It's a whole method for doing accounting and doing interaction at the ecosystemic level around accounting instead of having that be enterprise only. And so it's a very, very exciting front, I believe. So I think this question is, how can you invest in it? Well, if you go to HREA.io, there's a place where you can sponsor it. It's a really important bit of tooling that I think is going to be running on Holochain and really enhancing the ecosystem. Of course, when you invest that way, it's not going to be like you own stocks or shares and your ROI is going to be that you get the tooling. But I do urge you to go and support the HoloREA effort by going to HREA.io. Plug,
Yeah.
that's a plug.
It's a big plug. And it's amazing. I mean, I was just talking to Tom Miller and Luciano from they're working on a hydrogen project, which is using value flows. And Tom's sort of discussing like how REA is blowing his mind and how it's the future of everything. And I went back again to think again, maybe for people watching, I'm trying to draw in a little bit of history because this is a lot of work over a long period of time. And I remember the four of us having a debate in 2018 about REA and Art saying REA is like the critical thing in the ecosystem and it makes everything easier. And at least for me, I don't know what he's talking about, but and then when you look like 4 years on, as we move into 2023, you're seeing application developers searching for solutions in particular areas and then moving towards REA as a framework for thinking about problem solving, as a tool set for thinking about problem solving. And I think again, what I want to get across with that for people watching is this isn't, yes, we're excited today, but the thinking and the work on this has come over a long, long period of time. A lot of people within the organization, part of the organization previously, in the ecosystem, and it takes a massive vision in for all of these components. So it's very exciting. Sorry, Art, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just that I think people have questions about, like what are the apps that are going to blow up the ecosystem, that kind of stuff. I think REA is one of those stealth things, actually, that will, it won't be one of the early things. It will be one of these things maturing in the background that makes new things possible that suddenly are going to just blow everybody away. It's like, yeah.
Well, I want you to say a tiny little bit about that, because when it's called an accounting platform, REA, Resource Event Agent Accounting, but it's really not so much about accounting as it is about planning for production planning and interaction. So you can do problem solving. Like instead of writing a business plan, you write a production plan inside your ecosystem, and then you can produce into it and match needs and wants
and get signed agreements from digitally signed agreements from people. And
so it is this thing that is quite revolutionary. It's a different approach to how to do business together in a much more collaborative frame that I think is really exciting. And so I think you're right about that, some of those possibilities.
Networked accounting instead of centralized accounting. Mayor, you're going to say something?
No, it's just great. I mean, like it really gets to the heart of it, right? It's a new form of coordination, and that's what we're saying Holochain is built for. And so it's not surprising that an app that's making that tangible is what you're saying is so important right now, and what you think of as this stealth opportunity. So I think it's perfect.
Yeah, and for those of you who want to go a little bit deeper, I think there's some fantastic material on the REA website. It's brilliant. I remember doing an ecosystem session with Connor on it, and actually like the conversation with Tom for me at a slightly like less engineering level was fantastic, where he's basically showing like the daisy chain of inputs and really like the way that we could start to drill down on accountabilities that are created in very simple ways. But the daisy chain effect can be very, very powerful as we start to understand things like provenance, etc. So yeah, very excited. And that's a perfect segue into, so I think for the first time, this question has been asked like this. So it's always tell us the killer app. And today it's asked us, can you list the 1 to 3 killer features of Holochain, I think we're going for here, that makes it ahead of its competitors? And what is the competitive advantage Holochain has that you feel most confident about?
Well, I want to answer that question by getting on that killer word, right? Because I think the thing that gives us a competitive advantage is that we're not about competition. It's about collaboration. It's what Mary just said. Like the thing that is not, the frame shouldn't be killer app, killer feature. It should be mother app and mother feature. The kinds of features that are the spawning of a million other features.
Yeah, that give birth to a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And I think that that's what, so what we can talk about, what are the killer features, what they are is they're mother features. And it is the ability to create a context for consentful collaboration in the distributed world that's not intermediated by somebody who holds the purse strings and who can shut things down. It's like when you want to collaborate and play together, you can. It's designed for that at a really, really deep level. And I mean, how can I have anything but confidence for that when that's the core of the architecture? So that's the central thing. I mean, we often talk about Holochain as an agent-centric architecture, and it is agent-centric as opposed to data-centric. But what I like to think about it as, it is a place that starts from empowered agency and connects with the sociality at the same time, accountable sociality. So we're really an architecture that balances agency and social interaction and social composability. That's what we are at core. And because we hold those two things together, there's a really, really deep power to what can be done.
Yeah, and I want to jump back to actually something that Eric mentioned earlier, the new scaffolding that DM has been working on, that I'm sort of jokingly referring to as Web3 on Rails. Not actually going to be our brand name, but you know, it's kind of worth joking about it that way, or looking at it that way, making that metaphor for briefly. But it's pretty incredible. So not only, I mean, you pretty much can spin up a functioning Web3 app with the code it generates. So not only the entry structures and links and CRUD functions, the create, read, update, delete type functions that actually do the data operations, but it also generates tests for your infrastructure and UI components that you can immediately drop into a UI. And it's not necessarily making your UI pretty, but it does make it functional. So you end up basically having a functional thing with a little bit of extra coding if you have additional validation to do or optimizations or behaviors that you want, but you can do an incredible amount with this scaffolding tool right now. So not only that, but then we get into like massive scalability, because we're not stuck on consensus, which is basically a scalability lid for everything blockchain. The guarantees that we provide in our license, which is, as far as I know, still the only license that provides guarantees around ownership of your personal data and control of your private keys. We don't even have appropriate software licenses yet in other platforms to provide end user guarantees for these things. And then obviously the app generation, I was just saying, but a cross-platform launcher, the hosting that can reach mainstream web users, and key management and identity management, identity tools, you know, like all of these kinds of things. I don't see any other platform that is actually providing this full spectrum of work. So, yeah.
We hope those are mother features.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's the one other that I would like to add. I think that there's some really good content around killer features. One thing I've been reflecting on a lot lately is what you used to pay for that is now free with Holochain. And it, like so Eric called it, like, in a way, it's a collaborative, not competitive environment. And I guess I've been starting to relate to this as the anti-business model environment. And often people say, what's the Holochain business model? I think like the most interesting way that I've learned to look at it is the business model emerges when things that used to have business models no longer do. And I think that's a phenomenal killer feature, because we know that in our world, when we can start to do something more easily, more cheaply, more collaboratively, then that attracts a critical mass. And then from that critical mass, creativity emerges. So I'd say like that's probably my ultimate killer feature, is what now becomes free. And then I think like that's probably enough. We're question 13 and it's 7:45 UTC. Any corporate or governments waiting for using Holochain technology? If yes, please, any proof? Yes, there is a lot of interest, but I would also say for proof, given we're the beta release candidate, it's not quite the stage for adoption for corporates or governments. But if you've been checking out the AMAs and reading our content for the last 4 years, you'll see some of the interest. And I think the other thing is, if you pay attention to who's also paying attention to us, who's following and who's talking about it, we're 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from a lot of the kind of conversations that the person asking this question might be thinking about. And that's been a lot of our strategy, is that we've known over the last few years that as this is getting built out, we wanted to be in a show, don't tell mindset. And that comes not just technology, but that comes from adoption. So while we've been laying the relational fabric, I think we'll see a lot more in the next year or so.
I just want to throw one weird piece of proof in here that was even weird for us to find. Like if you go search in the patent databases for Holochain, there are large corporations like Bank of America who have written patents for solutions on things that rely on Holochain. We didn't even know about that until we happened to do that search. And so there's definitely organizations looking at this and taking it seriously, and you can just go do a patent search to find the proof that I was just describing. But yeah, they won't be launching it until the ecosystem does its first kind of layer of proof on this beta version, and they need to actually see scaled apps running with probably hundreds of thousands of users reliably, that kind of thing, before you're actually going to see a corporation come out publicly on this.
Yeah, I think this kind of rolls into the next one. What I'm curious about is there are many unnecessary projects in the market, true, and these projects constantly receive investments from companies, maybe less so today than a year ago. A project with a future like yours has made agreements with which companies so far, or pending agreements? If so, yes. And again, like it's probably the same answer. There's been a series of partnerships, 2018, 2019. We took a bit of a pause as we focused on building. But given this is kind of like a broad like adoption question, I would say one of the most exciting things for me right now is what Eric and Lightning Node Labs are building with I've started to notice a shift in people with a lot of business experience and credibility looking for some kind of, what they'll call it, very, very different things, because there's not, to me at least across the business world, a shared language for the kind of things like Eric describes as like, decentralized, like what did I know, agency and social interaction tools, etc. Right? But they're really looking for spaces that people can come together and coordinate, communicate, operate, play games, whatever it's going to be, that allows for the combination or the intersection of agency and social, using or based on some of the benefits I listed at the start. So I'm noticing 3-4 years ago that was not there, but today I'm noticing people are really saying, hey, I want and they're not using that words, but once you're starting to express something, then it's much easier for us to be closing the gap than it is for us to tell people you want this thing that you haven't even yet realized that you want and need.
I just want to chime in with one other piece. Some of these projects actually establish those partnerships in the startup phase, where those companies also have an interest and ownership in the project. And part of their interest and part of their commitment in the project is because they want to have influence and control in that space. right? And that's not an approach that we take to partnerships. For us, we're intending that truly Holochain can be the next web, the next internet. And we don't think that it is appropriate to be privately held or controlled. So we have taken a particular approach where we haven't made those kinds of partnerships, and basically there aren't any strings attached to the funding that we have and that we've received, which allows us to actually make sure that this is really a public trust. And I think that's one of the differences as well, is that some of these projects actually have some strings attached to some of those partners.
Yeah, agreed. Eric, what do you think about Holochain's near future after a couple of years? What applications do you think are most likely to have been developed?
Well, I don't know about mostly, because I don't have a crystal ball, but I am most excited about how Holochain can deliver on the deep decentralization in the DAO space. This is basically what you were talking about just now. I think Holochain's superpower is tooling for collaboration without the costs, both the financial costs and the social costs of the intermediary. It's that thing that you were saying about free. And so when you get that space, people can deliver on the thing that they talk about on-chain, a DAO that doesn't have all of its social space running on Discord. That we can actually have that stuff also be fully decentralized, where the decision-making isn't just about a tokenomics and voting through tokens, but is actually a much more human decision-making space, because there's applications that are doing groupware type stuff, where spinning up a group is super trivial and adding applications into that group is really easy. That's the kind of thing that we is about. And so I'm super excited about that. And I have a sense that maybe that is where a lot of the stuff will happen, but it's a big world. Maybe it'll mostly be REA. Who knows?
Okay, I'm conscious of time. And so, Mary, I know I've got a couple for you, so we might try and rattle through these. So first of all, congratulations on the excellent teamwork. I continue to support the project without fear. I wanted to ask if there's a possibility of a relatively quick deal with Mozilla, Google, or Apple. Thank you all. Yeah, and yes, let's say the closest I can think about is looking at those kind of corporations. When MasterCard came out and said, like, this is how we're thinking about blockchain and cryptocurrency, what they described as essentially Holochain and Holofuel. So I've got no idea what will happen with Apple and Google and all of these kind of things, but I'm sure that they'll be paying attention soon enough. Mary, are the team ever going to engage with the HOT community around potential predicted Holofuel pricing and the potential disconnect between HOT and BTC or HOT and Bitcoin? The community is a byproduct of what you have created.
Well, here's the thing. We're going to talk about Holofuel as something useful. We're going to talk about it as a microcurrency that powers the Holo network. We're going to talk about the general design of mutual credit, the kind of what David was just talking about, and how those currencies are better able to reflect assets, whether those are the digital services in the case of Holo, or whether they might be other things like food or energy. Projects that talk about price can't easily be licensed or regulated in larger jurisdictions. And as long as there continues to be so much uncertainty about what is going to be needed across that regulatory landscape, we're just going to err on the side of caution. We're not going to be talking about price. And so that means we're not going to be talking about it for HOT. We're not going to be talking about it for Holofuel. We're focused on function.
Awesome. Okay. And sorry, go on.
I just want to emphasize, she said can't, as in cannot be easily licensed and regulated. Like, it causes problems with regulators if you talk about price. We don't do that.
Yep.
And will the Holochain beta release, the V0.2, need to be released before Holo Beta and others begin their beta stages? Great work, team.
Well, yes, beta 0.2.0 for Holochain is going to need to be released before Holo Beta is ready. Holochain and Holo they're developing in parallel. Some of the features and changes in the beta RC are helping us right now with testing that we're doing with Holofuel, for example. So yes, and that doesn't mean we're stopping and waiting at all. We're continuing to make progress on Holo.
Yeah, just to be clear, ideally, apps don't have to make any changes to the apps between 0.1 and 0.2, right? 0.1 is trying to hit app stability. Then we're doing some infrastructure updates in 0.2. So it shouldn't interfere with app development at all. We might end up needing to sneak in a couple of little tweaks, but the goal is to really keep app development stable.
Yeah, as Eric said earlier, networking update and update the conductor.
Yeah, but we'll be running on those updated conductors.
Yep. Okay. And I guess, Mary, this ties into it, and also a really long-standing question, but when is the Holofuel release?
Well, we've been doing alpha releases of Holofuel, throughout 2022. That's actually a big part of the alpha program. Most recently, we've been testing the automatic creation of invoices by host and the payments of those by publishers. And we're going to continue doing that with the RC release when we update all of the infrastructure for Holo. And then we're going to be working on the next initiative, which is the Holofuel Reserve Initiative. And that's going to eventually support the swap process. So the Holofuel, if the question is just when beta, we don't have a date for you on that. We're working on the roadmap as per the website. So that's still our plan and our trajectory.
Great. Okay. Art, if Binance collapse, which holds billions of HOT, do we have any alternative plans for the HOT and Holofuel token economy health?
Well, yeah, that question was about the tokenomics earlier, and I want to say that the tokenomics of Holofuel aren't really dependent on any particular exchange, right? The value proposition is really that it's backed by hosting power, just like we have other currencies in the ecosystem coming out backed by food or energy or housing and those kinds of things that makes it inherently valuable with or without exchanges. So it has the possibility of surviving the collapse of potentially all exchanges. Just want to point that out. However, if people have their coins in Binance's HOT wallet, Binance's wallet, they could be damaged by a collapse of Binance. And there's really not anything we can do about that. That's one of the dangers of keeping your coins in the exchanges of the wallets of exchanges. And so I want to say that we're trying to build for an economy that isn't reliant on whether or not regulators come down hard on exchanges. Like if we keep having these things like Luna and FTX and things like that happening, there could really be backlash that might make the crypto space difficult in many, many, many jurisdictions. And our goals are to have an economy that isn't reliant on that, because there's inherent value that is itself, the value behind it is itself exchangeable, where there isn't any like guaranteed value behind Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything like that.
I think the phrase that we've been using from the very beginning is productive capacity backed mutual credit. That means that the productive capacity of food, energy, hosting is actually what is reflected in the mutual credit currency that's there. And that's a really key distinction that is not really in place in the crypto world. So we hope, do we have a plan in terms of the Holofuel tokenomics? Yes, the plan is to have a productive capacity backed mutual credit system. That is the plan.
Super. Okay. So a couple of visionary questions. What do we feel about this huge leap forward? Have we ever felt like we wouldn't reach this milestone? And do you feel like scientists that have worked out how to split the atom?
That's a funny question. Sometimes when things are really bad, you feel like, oh, we're never going to get there. But in truth, actually, I've always known we're going to get here. I just know that it's slow and it's steady and it's a little bit painful sometimes, but I've been very confident. As to being the scientist who found out how to split the atom, well, for one, the context, again, like those scientists were trying to split things. What is the context of splitting the atom? That was making an atom bomb, right? Not so happy about that. I guess you might say about energy. I'm much more interested in the fusing of the atom, the joining, the collaboration. So for me, the thing that I'm excited about and what I do feel like is I'm a scientist, right? Not more like an engineer working on the problems of social physics. What are the dynamics of social physics? And what's really needed? What's the dimensionality of collaboration? What are things like membranes and how do you manage them? That stuff is super exciting. And I'm excited to be in the realm of people thinking about that. I'm not the only one. We're not the only ones. There are lots of people who are really interested in social physics and how do we advance social physics for collaboration, for being closer together, for working and solving problems in human ways as opposed to just technical ways. So that's where I am, and I feel really excited about reaching this milestone because it's part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to chime in and say we have had some missteps along the way, but and I didn't expect it to take this long. Some of those missteps actually did cost us time, but it's really awesome to be crossing into, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel at the moment, and I'm just excited to be building on this new version. There's so many things I've been waiting to build, and yeah.
Totally agree. So after 5 years, do you still believe Holochain will outstrip their competition if we have a cheaper and faster blockchains like Solana or other fully scalable peer-to-peer frameworks like HolePunch?
Well, so far, I haven't seen projects that have shifted to the fundamental approach that we have. This fundamental approach of agent centricity mixed together with sociocentricity and holding those things in common. All the projects that I've seen are really still trying to manage consensus. There are some of the more interesting ones that are doing some things that are much more like us. There's like hyper. What was that?
Hyperspace.
Hyperspace. They're really close and doing some cool things about having a validated space, a socially validated space, and individual spaces. But I feel like so it doesn't matter what their transaction perception improvements are if the fundamental nature of how they're holding things are. I think we still have, if you want to live in that world, a competitive advantage. That means that our stuff will last and be able to be produced. So that's how I'm feeling about it. Do you have anything?
I don't know. I think we're gonna have to see how some of this plays out. I think we've got some really great tooling for apps. I think we have the ability to do things that many of these other platforms don't. They certainly are calling things dApps, but I think basically everything you can do in Web 2, you can do in Web 3 on Holochain, and this just isn't the case for some of these other platforms. I mean, Solana is really optimized for transactions, not necessarily dApps. You can build dApps on them, but I think there still are performance constraints. HolePunch is a different issue. I haven't actually seen what the app building like that on that is, and I think some of what they're doing in the networking space is cool. But I mean, fundamentally, we've got this whole terminology around that has emerged in the blockchain space around layer 0, layer 1, like that kind of stuff. But layer 0 already assumes blockchain, which already assumes global consensus, which is already a huge scalability cap. And so what you get in Holochain is Holochain covers layers 1 through 3 in a unified package, and then you get the app development layer on top of that. And really, if you keep in mind that there is no mainnet and that each app is also its own network, it's really that 0 through 4 are packaged with each app. Like it's as a scalable thing. And so it doesn't, I haven't seen anything else that is actually structured like we're structured. And so we're just going to have to see how this plays out in the space and whether we can make this usable enough for developers that you can just see the app ecosystem explode and speak for itself.
Yeah, thanks very much.
So it looks like these are some live questions that were pulled
Yeah,
up.
we've got 3 live questions we want to pull up, and everyone else who asked, sorry, we just got through 24 questions out of the 125, plus we're going to pick 3 live questions. That was a really good art. I feel like you skipped over a couple of nice critical pieces in that previous answer, but I think that's probably space for an article or some other content. But just really quick app-related things, because there'll be people who are still watching now that want to understand status of apps. So first one I want to go to is it a good time to jump into working on an app, or should we wait for the components that you guys have been talking about? Maybe that's HAP stable beta, or maybe that's some of the scaffolding and other tools. What do you recommend?
Well, I want to say something about this one before Eric jumps in. There's lots of different developers out there. Some of them have been in our community for a long, long time, and they've been developing with all sorts of crazy ups and downs and changes to Holochain. They're used to some of that. Other people are coming into Holochain and they're much more new, and they're coming in and they're looking at, how do I get this thing started and what do I have to do? So I think there's different answers for different folks. For one, there are some pieces of what's being updated right now that are critical for most everybody. I mean, the first part that Eric mentioned was the API for JavaScript or whatnot. I don't know if I'm saying all the names right, but those things are really kind of necessary for anyone to update their app effectively. But other parts like the scaffolding tool, I would say once that's out, yeah, come try it out. Especially if you are using Linux right now. So just I want to put this one caveat up there, because you'll notice if you go to the developer portal for Holochain, we're saying this works really great with Linux, this get started that we're offering. And we don't really give the instructions for Mac and Windows just yet. But that's because we pulled that out for right now, because during this RC period, we are actively working to get it tested so that we can support Linux, Windows, and Mac for the get started, so that any developer can come and get started with Holochain.
Awesome. All right. In the future, will apps still require launcher? Or will we require launcher to be able to download and run apps?
So I want to answer that question. This is not a question about in the future. It is already the case that we do not require the launcher in order to download apps. If you go to acorn.software, you can download a running application that is very sophisticated in the user interface point of view. It's a full Holochain application. You download it directly from the website, and it is bundled as a desktop application. So it's a single application running on your desktop to be able to do project management tooling. It's a pretty cool app. And there are other ones that are out there that are like that. So already, application developers can bundle up Holochain in their own desktop apps, and there are lots of different ways that Holochain applications can be deployed. We're doing the App Store and the launcher as a simple, easy way to have that stuff out there and being able to download things in an ecosystem of apps. We expect there to be lots of different types of deploy paths for sending out Holochain-based apps.
Brilliant. Okay, finally, has the migrating between the HAP DNA versions been streamlined?
We already have support for basically opening and closing chains, for actually migrating from one DNA to another. What we don't have is a lot of support for the developers to migrate whatever data that they want from the old to the new. And the reason for that is it's sort of like a snake shedding their skin, kind of like when you're moving from one version to a new version, there may be kinds of data that you want to leave behind and kinds of data that you want to carry forward. And there's no way for Holochain to know which is which for your app. So that it's really up to the app developers to put in their initialization process on the new app what migration strategy they're using. Now we're intending to build some more affordances, some tools to support that and make it a little easier that we haven't built yet. But there are very different approaches. Whether some applications have very user-centric types of data where the user is going to want to migrate their chain over. Like maybe if you think about migrating your tweet history or something like that, right? Like it's very personal, your tweet history is yours, right? Where others maybe like a wiki or things like that, or document editing tools, what you care more about is the global state of the document or the global state of the wiki. You don't necessarily want to carry over every revision from all time. You could leave some of those revisions in the past, just carry over the changes in the last week. And but those are the kinds of decisions that apps have to make. And so the process currently is that each app does it on their own. And the example Eric gave of acorn.software, they actually currently provide for migrating between versions. by dumping the data, the state of the project. It's a project management tool, the state of the project to JavaScript, and then reloading it or JavaScript JSON, I should say, and then reloading it into the new version that you've updated to. So,
and that works really seamlessly and smoothly. So it's like it's already there. You can do it, but we do need to provide more support for that for developers to make it easier for them.
Okay, super. Thanks. I'm going to call it to a close there. Firstly, thank you so much. I'll just go in order of my screen. Mary Camacho, thank you. Eric Harris-Braun, Art Brock, thank you guys. And then a couple of other thanks. Firstly, just wishing everybody watching happy holidays. Thanks for all being with us over the 2022. I guess this is our last AMA of the year. And then especially thank you to the team who have been working. Mary mentioned a little bit, or gave us a little bit of insight into the changing operations that this Holochain beta release candidate is bringing in. And Art talked about the whole team coming together. And I think we're going to see, well, I feel we've talked a lot internally about stepping up as an organization and transitioning to this, or state changing. So it's all set for an incredibly exciting 2023. But there's thank you to everybody who's been part of it internally. And also a huge appreciation. We talked a lot a few years back and about community, and thank you for community. And one of the things I've noticed is how we're able to bridge between organization, community or ecosystem, and the sort of real and the layers within. And so they're talking, people like Guillaume that Art and Eric mentioned have been building part of the scaffolding, is like in that amazing hybrid role of, you know, sort of almost within the organization and almost within the ecosystem. And it's this real cascading of relationships, quality, effort that has brought us all here. I don't know that we could really pick out anything and say that was it, but it's actually been the whole system learning to grow and evolve and work together. So for every single person that's been part of it to date and that is on board for its evolution, thank you so much. And that's all from me. Have a wonderful holiday period and see you in 2023.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.